Hello and welcome to another exciting new episode of Talking About Stoicism, where we're going over the letters, the moral letters, the letters on ethics by Seneca. The letters from Seneca are very long, and what I try to do in these videos is I read a letter and I try to look for something that I find appealing, rather than what I started off doing, which is going over an entire letter. I think they're just too long for that. And today we were in letter 25, and what struck me was this particular passage. Speaking of Epicurus, I'll also enclose one of his aphorisms in this letter. He says, "Do everything as though Epicurus were watching you." Epicureanism is an odd philosophical school. The Epicureans had to remember, as in memorize, Epicurus's birthday. And Epicurus was kind of revered as, I don't necessarily want to say God, but as an enlightened person by his followers, which is something the Stoics kind of objected to. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, was clear that he did not want to be revered like that. I'm not judging, I'm just saying that's an interesting contrast. Seneca continues, "Assuredly, it is beneficial to set a watch on yourself and to have someone to look up to, someone who you think will make a difference in your plans. To be sure, it is much grander if you live as if some good man were always present and held you in his gaze. But I'm satisfied even with this. Let everything you do be done as if watched by someone. Solitude encourages every fault in us. Once you have progressed far enough to have some reverence even for yourself, then you may dismiss your tutor. Meanwhile, put yourself under the guardianship of men of authority, let it be Cato or Scipio or Laelius, or someone else at whose coming even desperate characters would suppress their faults, while you go about making yourself the person in whose company you would not dare to do wrong." I think there is a lot to be said for this approach, and you can approach this in a couple of ways. First of all, there is the taking on of someone as a template, looking at someone as a person that you can imitate. Believe in me and bear fruit. I am the vine of life, imitate me. These kinds of words have been said before. So that's one way to approach this. You can find a person that you admire and that you then try to emulate. Now, we know that whatever person you pick, that person is always going to have some sort of a flaw. There'll always be some sort of a flaw because it's impossible for someone to be perfect. Stoics would say, well, then that person would be a sage. And there ain't no sages around. Like, you had Socrates and that was pretty much it. And there may be some other people that you could look to, but there's always some sort of flaw. Natural, because this is what human beings are like. However, I will say I have found it, a sip of tea, decaf tea, because it's getting later. And I'm an old man now, so I can't handle caffeine in the evenings anymore. Anyway, you can find someone that you can emulate. And I have found that to be a very useful approach to specific problems in life. For example, as a young academic and scientist, I have definitely looked to other scientists to learn things, to learn how to conduct myself. And you can get different things from different people. For example, I greatly admired the head of cognitive psychology in the department where I did my PhD, who was able... I'll tell you the short story, because I think that illustrates the concept best. I was impressed by his way to give presentations. He could give a presentation seemingly without preparation and without effort. And it sounded confident, and it was always amazing. And my favorite story of his, I was there. I was taking a course on fMRI data analysis, and he was to give a lecture in that course. This was a graduate course. He was to give a guest lecture on the history of fMRI in psychology. And he lived close to the university, but he worked from home a lot. And the coordinator of that course, another full professor, said, "Oh, he's a bit late." Time ticks. At some point, it's 15 minutes after the starting time of that lecture, and the one professor isn't there. So he gets called. He shows up. He lives close to the university. He shows up. He walks into the classroom. He puts a USB drive into the computer. He puts PowerPoint, his PowerPoint presentation on. He says, "I'm so sorry, I had this particular lecture in my agenda for next week. I don't know why." He was also incredibly grumpy, so he basically insinuated that it was not his fault, but everyone else's fault for having moved this lecture or something. But now, here's the thing. He had not prepared to teach this class. He had his PowerPoint, but it was very basic. It was pictures and some prompts on it. Then he took a deep breath, and he just taught a 2-hour lecture with some prompts on a PowerPoint, but that lecture was slick. It sounded like that had been practiced for hours, but it wasn't practiced because he had forgotten about it. That's the skill that I admire. Not the being late or forgetting about important appointments, but I admire that at that moment of, this is insanity. This man gives a coherent story. He is so confident. That is something you can emulate. That level of confidence, that ability to speak in public without any fear. I think in his case, maybe it was a little bit of arrogance. He was just like, "No, I know this stuff. No problem." You can emulate something like that. You can find other things. I've been fortunate to have had some outstanding mentors in my work life. And I've learned different things from all of them. These are all little things that I can emulate. And I don't think there's a point to giving all kinds of concrete examples because I've just given you one. But that approach, emulating a person that you admire, can be a good thing. The Stoics would say you should emulate a wise person, sophos in ancient Greek. Literally a wise man, but that could obviously be a wise woman, could be anyone, right? A wise person, a sage, I think is a nice gender-neutral word. You can find someone that you admire and then try to put into practice what that person does, and whether that is giving a presentation, being able to do accounting, whatever it is that person does, you try to emulate. That gives you something to aspire to, something to work towards. And I found that to be a useful approach. The advantage to that is also that if you pretend that in everything you do, and that may sound sort of nerve-wracking, I don't think it is, but if you pretend that that person is looking over your shoulder all the time, you may find yourself not doing certain things that you would have done otherwise. You may not send the gossipy email. You may not send the text that is unpleasant about a certain person to another person. You may not do that because the person who has inspired you would not do that. It's, I think to me, is sort of a security mechanism. While he or she would not do that, I should probably not do that. You know, like if I pretend that they're there, then I wouldn't do that thing. And that ties into a second useful aspect that I think we can distill from this letter, and that is, if you pretend that you're never alone, that you are continuously being watched, you will act better. You will do better things, because the little strange things that you probably should not do, but you do when there's nobody watching, you will not do anymore, because now there is someone watching. And although that may sound like a bit of a sort of paranoia-inducing thing, I don't think it is. It's just a theoretical concept to help you do certain things or not do certain things. Hopefully do good things and not do not so good things. That aspect of emulation of whoever it is that you admire, I think can lead to very positive changes in your life. And you see this all the time. You see it in movies or read in books all the time, but where people ask themselves, what would X do? But you can do that too. And again, I found it to be a very useful approach. Well, what would he do? He'd probably do this. Well, then maybe I should do that. And try. See what happens. I found that to be a helpful approach. I hope that is something that you may find helpful as well. But as always, let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments if you think that this is something that can be beneficial to you, or why not, or why it is, or maybe who you would pick. I've in the past, there are a couple of people. I always greatly admired Umberto Eco for being a free-thinking, super intellectual person who was incredibly intelligent, but also had no problem going against authority, for example, in a respectful manner, but would definitely vent his opinion. Or I also really like Eric Kandel, who is a Nobel Prize winner, and who has made great contributions toward neuroscience, incredibly important work, but who's seems to be a very pleasant person when you see interviews with him, who really cares about the people that he supervises, for example. So I think that everybody has those kinds of people that you can aspire to, that you can try to emulate. So there we have it. I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you again next week for more talk about Stoicism. Thanks for watching. Bye.